Welcome you back to the Patrick Netherton Show right here in 1130 The Tiger. He's Rogers, I'm Patrick, and we're pleased to welcome in from The Athletic, one of the best college football writers in the business. She is Nicole Auerbach. Nicole, how are you?
I'm hanging in there. How are you?
That's kind of what we're all doing at this point. I'm back on college basketball, so it's been a lot of people, press row being in the third level of a giant building, and I've never had to call basketball with binoculars before, but we're kind of getting to that point with protocols. So it's a little crazy. Meanwhile, everything else in college football has been pretty wacky. We've seen Big Ten, ACC, now the SEC announcing some schedule changes. Just do you get a chance to turn your phone off at any point in time, or do you have to be in a constant state of vigilance with what's going down in college football right now?
Yeah, it's pretty constant. I mean, it is changing rapidly. And I think one thing that has been a very real adjustment this season is that there's been a lot of news on Fridays. We obviously had 2 ACC cancellations the morning of on Saturdays even, but Friday is typically in a normal year pretty quiet. It's a travel day. Things have already been said and interviews have been done. And, it's a day of transit. And this year it's been a very eventful day. Basically just, waiting to see if games are going to happen. And it's part of the uncertainty of all of this because you're waiting on test results, you're waiting on clearances and things like that. But it has made basically the entire week pretty 24/7 and nonstop just because you don't know when people are getting their results back, when they're making decisions. There's still the threat of constant meetings. I mean, we're kind of all just waiting to see if the Big Ten is going to change their threshold for a Big Ten championship game. That could come at any time. So you just don't know. And I think that, there will be a lot of people who will have a huge sigh of relief when the football season is over, even if they then will worry about basketball season. But just to get it in the rearview mirror, because I think there is so much daily anxiety and daily stress for everyone involved in college athletics, including those of us who cover it, that I think we will all be pretty happy to have in the rearview mirror.
Well, I've got to imagine just for you personally, it'll be nice for everyone to to stop telling you hate the sport and you don't want to see the sport
Yes.
succeed. I mean, look, I don't. Number one, being a woman in sports journalism is already, I know, enough of a hassle, like what you deal with on the daily from people that think you don't know anything simply because of your gender. Now you add to that because you're a one who is preaching precaution when it comes to COVID. All of a sudden now you hate the sport you cover. I've got to imagine just sort of personally this has been incredibly tough for you.
Yeah, it has been a lot. Obviously, if I didn't like the sport I cover, I would cover something else.
Right.
And so that argument has never made much sense. And I want my friends to stay employed. I want us to have stuff to write and talk about. But I do think, a weird thing happened over the summer in our space where, a segment of the population decided they didn't want to think about any potential impact that COVID would have. So even writing about scheduling changes or the fact that, conferences are considering pushing their championship game back, which, by the way, they are because they're not being played tomorrow. Yeah. So they all ended up doing these contingency plans. People just didn't want to hear that things were going to be different. And I think, it's been a season full of different and disruptions. And, every time you even tweet that a game is postponed or canceled or moved, everyone's like, well, what about all the games that are played? And it's like, well, those are staying on schedule.
Right.
You're sharing the news that's changed. And so it ended up, it's just been a frustrating period of positivity versus reality.
Yeah.
And I don't think you need to ignore what's happening. But again, all of the contingency plans, the testing, contact tracing, all these things I've been reporting on have been the story of the season. That's how it's worked or how it hasn't worked. And so, I'm proud of all my reporting through that. But yeah, it'll be nice to get just back to a regular calendar, regular setting, regular schedule when we can talk more about football and not just, which teams are going to be able to play and which teams, are dealing with outbreaks.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. You had mentioned the sort of having to be vigilant and news coming at all times. Look at Buffalo, right? They're on the road getting ready to head to Ohio to take on Ohio University, and Ohio calls them and says, "Oh, by the way, guys, we're out because of COVID." They have to turn around and take the bus back home. So when it all boils down to it, Jarrett Patterson, the only thing stopping him at this point is another team getting COVID.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't get to see him this weekend, which is a big bummer. I think the whole country, we were all, introduced to him last week, and he's very realistically going to hit 1,000 rushing yards in 5 games.
Yeah.
So we got to wait for that. But yeah, I think that story shows exactly what everyone's been doing. We've had, part of the reason that Dabo, Swinney, and Clemson were so frustrated is because they got all the way to Tallahassee and spent the night, right? There's been a lot of money and travel and time and effort put into trying to give these games a chance to happen. And so when there are those very, very 11th hour cancellations, it is a tough pill to swallow. And again, it really is this daily anxiety and stress that is hanging over everyone's head. Think about if you're a 19-year-old player and you've been getting tested, waiting on your results to make sure you're negative. What if then your roommate tests positive, now you got to go quarantine for 2 weeks. It's just this constant state of stress. And I can't imagine being a player and dealing with it. And I think, that's what, when we think about this stuff, I think sometimes, people refer to it or they want to plug different opponents, get games in certain windows. And it's really not just a TV show. It's really, these lives of these people and these teenagers who've been, basically just forgone everything that's normal about a college experience to try to get a season in. And it's just been a lot. And so I think when all is said and done and we get to the end, I'll be really, happy for the players to get to see their families and their friends.
Yeah.
And, and not, again, live under this daily stress of, I'm getting a test result. Is it negative? Is it positive? I just can't imagine what that's been like for them the last few months.
Talking to Nicole Auerbach from The Athletic. All right, so what do you make of what's going on with the ACC and the Big Ten? Obviously, in the Big Ten, the story is, can Ohio State get to 6 to get to the Big Ten championship game? If they don't, will the committee still take them? Or will the Big Ten ADs come together and decide that they're going to waive that 6-game minimum in order to get to the Big Ten championship game? And Barry Alvarez talked a little bit about just that. What do you make of what's going on? We'll start with the Big Ten. What do you make of this in terms of them trying their damnedest to get Ohio State either into the championship game or if not that, find a way to get them into the playoff?
Yeah, I think we'll know in the next couple of days how this is going to play out, because I think, you can wait a little bit here and see if Michigan's able to get their arms around the outbreak that they're currently dealing with. But, you are going to have to figure that out. This decision is going to come from the athletic director level. They're the group that has to decide if they want to make any changes to that minimum threshold for the championship game. Right now, those ADs are meeting once a week or meeting on Wednesdays, but they can add meetings at any point. But, as of last night, when I checked in with one of those athletic directors, there haven't been substantial conversations yet. That doesn't mean that they won't have them. We know it. Barry Alvarez has said that, it's something that should be considered. And if you think about it, part of the reason that Ohio State in particular, but the Big Ten, eventually felt it was important to play in the fall this year was to align themselves enough to have a chance to make the playoff. And that's because of Ohio State.
Right.
And that's why Ryan Day was so vocal, right? Because, if it was just about playing football, you could play in January, February, whatever. But it was about playing with the chance to make the playoff. So I think that should be part of the consideration and the calculation, because there's a lot at stake in prestige and also just the chance to be part of it. It's a big deal in the sport and financially. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they do, have that conversation. I also think another potential possibility would be reshuffling the schedule a little bit. If Michigan is the team that can't play, can you find Ohio State a different opponent, early in the week? We've seen conferences get very creative about moving things around, especially when they're in a conference-only schedule. So I do think there's probably multiple options on the table here. And I would think that they're going to explore them, because if we've learned anything from 2020, it's that you really do need to be nimble. You need to be flexible. Mm-hmm. And even if you put in some strict guidelines, you're never too far along that you can't revisit them.
Well, I think this is, if anything, that this has proven that the whole, we're setting our non-conference schedule 15 years in advance. That whole thought process is out the window now. If you want to schedule a game a month in advance, or as we've seen in 2020, a couple of days in advance, then go get you some. I like the idea that maybe this will allow some teams to start playing each other non-conference, where they're not setting this stuff up a decade in advance.
I hope so. I mean, listen, they don't need to schedule games out 2.5 days before a game. Like, I'm not saying they got to do that.
Right.
But what about 2 years, 3 years? Like something where it's like, that you think it's still going to be that head coach and maybe some of those players, right? Like, that would be nice. We don't need to do this 15 years out. But again, I do think that has shown that it's not the end of the world. And yeah, the game may not, the coaching staff may not feel like they're nearly as prepared as they usually are, but you get through it. And so, I do hope that some of that shifts and some of that thinking shifts and changes, just because we've seen it done. And it's, you don't have to do things just because they've always been done a certain way before.
Agreed. Talking to Nicole Auerbach from The Athletic. All right. Obviously, I know you've probably, I'm going to say had your fill, but I know you've had to deal a lot with the Sarah Fuller situation at Vanderbilt. I'm just curious, did you expect the kind of blowback that came with that? And look, we have two guys in the afternoon here on right after my show, and they're both, this is a PR stunt. It looked like she was trying to kick off when the special teams coordinator said it was a squib. It's what it looked like. Were you expecting the sort of the level of vitriol that accompanied this move?
I mean, I unfortunately would say that I did.
Yeah.
I was not surprised by it, and it's part of the reason I wrote about this earlier in the week on The Athletic. Like, I wish she had just kicked it through the end zone. Because you knew that it was going to be picked apart, whatever she did or didn't do. Mm-hmm. And so even though it's very obvious that, like, the ball went exactly where it was supposed to go, and you can watch, like, everyone on the kickoff team and you see that, and there was no return, and those were the goals, and she literally switched sports a couple of days prior to the game, so they wanted to do what was most natural and most likely to succeed, and she did that. I knew that you were gonna have a lot of bad faith actors who were gonna say, "Oh, are we sure that was designed, or is that just how her leg is?" Like, no, she just won an SEC championship. We've seen clips of her, kicking the heck out of the soccer ball. Like, it's not an issue. But I would say that, like, I think what's been lost in a lot of it is this idea that it's a publicity stunt. First of all, I don't think anyone meant to force the nation to watch Vanderbilt's offense that closely. Like, I don't think anyone wanted. I don't think
Vanderbilt wants you to. Vanderbilt doesn't want you to watch their offense that closely.
No. Right, and so that idea just doesn't make much sense. And also, I'm sorry, the other alternative here was to not have a kicker. Like, the part of the narrative that has just been totally lost in all of this is that it's her helping. There was no other option. They've had specialists in quarantine isolation. There's no men's soccer program, and they couldn't do open tryouts because everyone is sent home for the semester already. So you're very limited in terms of, like, who is in the testing protocols and can do this. And so you have someone willing to help out, change sports, learn all about all the different angles you kick the ball, different parts of the foot that you're kicking it off of, and how to kick field goals and all these things. And I spoke to their special teams coordinator earlier in the week, and he told me, like, they did try a couple of their players on their roster who had played soccer growing up, and they couldn't do it, right? Like, field goals are hard.
Yeah.
And she was learning and picking things up and getting better. And so the element of, like, pitching in and helping, if this were a dude on the soccer team who did this, all of these same people would be saying, what a cool story.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. And by the way, we have a local high school where a girl from the soccer team is the kicker now for this local high school because their kicker quit in the offseason, and the head coach went to the women's soccer coach and said, "Hey, do you have anybody that can kick some extra points?" And she said, "Sure." And this girl named Aubrey Kuntz steps up. She's now the extra point kicker. I've seen her 3 times now, and she's hit all of them but one. And by the way, she was also named homecoming queen and had the sash and the crown while wearing her football uniform. But no one's batting an eye at that. And yet this story from Vanderbilt is such a controversy for some reason, and I don't understand it. This is the part that frustrates me about things. Why are we still so provincial when it comes to our thought processes around college football when North DeSoto High School has clearly not had a single issue with having a female kicker in a tight situation like that? I don't get it, Nicole, and it bothers me that we have such a provincial manner of thinking when it comes to college football.
It bothers me too, because I think that people who have always seen people that look like them in things that they love or positions of power, they don't realize how impactful it is to actually see somebody do something. Like when I was a little girl and in first grade, I wrote down that I wanted to be the first woman to play Major League Baseball. I didn't really think about the fact that I had already switched over into softball, because after T-ball, all the girls switched to softball, and then all the boys just continued on in Little League, and they were different sports. But if I had seen a woman playing Major League Baseball, maybe I would have stayed in baseball, right? It's just like it creates an opportunity that you didn't know was possible for someone that looks like you. And so to belittle that, it's really frustrating, because everyone in the sport that you love has always looked like you, and I still love this sport, despite the fact that there are very few people that look like me that work in and around it, right?
Yeah.
And so you get this one moment where someone, again, is helping. This isn't someone who grew up, like, a different breakthrough moment will be someone who plays high school football and, like, eventually gets up to Division I
gets a scholarship.
Power 5 program, right? Yeah, gets scholarship, is like a full-time member of a team. That's totally different. But, like, there still is it matters to see yourself represented, to see something possible that you didn't know was possible. And so, again, it just bothers me that people who've always seen people that look like them in the sport that they love have a problem with, 3 seconds of me getting to see someone who looks like me playing in the game.
Yeah.
It's really frustrating.
It definitely is. What, by the way, what position did you play in softball? What were you? Were you a power hitter, running slapper?
I was a pitcher.
Oh, you're a pitcher.
No, I'm a regular hitter. We had some good slap hitters on my team.
Yeah.
I was a pitcher. I was fast pitch. And I played, the football question is interesting, because I know some friends who really would have loved to do that growing up. And I really didn't think that was a possibility. I would just play catch with my dad. But I also would do, I was the powder puff quarterback and like all these things where it was super fun, but that's all you can really aspire to do,
right,
if you're a woman, because you can't play on the real teams. So again, that's the next big threshold to clear. And we'll get there someday, but it's just, we shouldn't have to go through this all the time. Like Katie Hanida and I've been talking a lot about when she went through this at New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we shouldn't be in the exact same place that she was in, like 20 years ago, right? Like that just shouldn't be, but we are.
I mean, isn't that kind of a microcosm of the entire country at this point? We're kind of still where we were 20, 30, 40 years ago, even now, with all the progress we seemingly have made in a lot of areas. We kind of find ourselves back where we started, and that's the ultimate frustration. Nicole, you're the best. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good weekend. Hope you actually get to put your phone down at some time and enjoy your life. And please give Red a pat on the head and a biscuit for me.
I will. Thanks for having me. Have a good weekend.
All right. Nicole Auerbach from The Athletic.